Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Sequel Q&A. My name's Doug. So, we're taking the train of slasher icons. First, we had Michael Myers last episode where we talked Halloween Resurrection, and the next slasher that we're going to put under a microscope, we've only covered once before with the Dream Master. Of course, I'm talking Freddy Krueger, and I'm talking about Freddy'S Dead, the final nightmare, the 6th installment. And this is when I really kind of enjoying the behind the scenes on it. There's a really cool story in Never Sleep Again talking about, wow, like Peter Jackson wrote a treatment of the script, which I would love to read because they talk about a little bit of what the idea was in Never Sleep Again. And man, I love the idea of it. I really wish somebody would run with that for a new Nightmare on Elm Street because it's super clever, and I wish they would have done it because I think it would have definitely worked out. But the movie aside, which would be so much fun to talk with Jamie next week about, is this week's guest. Special effects, you know I love them. I love what's going on behind the scenes and how it works, especially when it comes to the 80s and 90s and still 2000s, and, you know, we're still getting practical effects and prosthetics, but just the 80s and 90s, I feel like it was the Wild West. And I had a blast chatting with Jeffrey S. Farley. Jeffrey, I found on Instagram, and I was like, oh my God, this guy's worked on so many cool things over the years. The remake of the Blob, he works on that great scene in the car when the spikes go through that Playboy model that was in Under Siege. The same thing happens in the interview with Jeff. I say it, and he goes, oh no, I was in the back seat, and he remembered her name right away. It starts with an E. Should have wrote better notes before I started doing this, but yeah, just talking about he grew up in Glendale, California, so he kind of grew up in the thick of everything. He has some cool stories from his childhood, and he even says like, wow, I was like more surrounded by it as a kid than I am later in life. But you're going to love that. And just, you know, his career working on all these cool different things like the Stepford Children. That was one of his earlier gigs. And then the Blob, some great behind the scenes on that. Freddy'S Dead. His scene that he worked on was pretty neat that he talked about. Fortunately, it got cut. But just the experience. You know what? No matter what these guys and gals that work on movies in front of or behind the camera, you might get cut, but check clears. You still have that memory. And Jeffrey has a lot of good ones. Working with Full Moon when he first started connecting with them, and we're on so many of their out of this world movies that they make, man. What Charlie Band and all those people do over there is so much fun. We talked to a few Full Moon people. Audio Andy is one of them who actually remembered Jeffrey, which is pretty neat. But yeah, prepare to hear some really cool behind the scenes on how things are made behind the scenes and how he did some of the effects on some of these films. So do me a favor, if you're new here, welcome. Man, we love people that check out our show because we have a lot of fun doing it. Just seeing those ticks go up on listens are just an added benefit. We just crossed over 50,000 listens, which when me and Jamie started this, we thought the only people that listen, maybe my mom, maybe Jamie's mom, I don't know. That's all I thought. So we've met a lot of cool people doing this. So thanks for listening. And please follow us on all social media at Sequels Only. Like, share, subscribe, do whatever. Just tell one person a day about us. That's all we need. Just one. Just one. And without further ado, here is Special Effects Master, Jeffrey S. Farley. What are you guys watching? Anything good?
It's the Addams Family.
Nice. Movie or TV show?
The TV show. We go for the classics.
Nice. He just turned 92.
I know. It's amazing. Wow, I never got to work with John Astin, but boy, that would be awesome. I did a couple movies with actually I did movies with both Mackenzie and and Sean.
Oh, really?
Never met, but I didn't really meet. I probably came closer to meeting Mackenzie on Garbage Pail Kids movie, but
yeah.
But I did another show with him later, and I was never on set for it. But that's about as close as I ever get to the Astons.
Hey, not too bad. You know, Sean's career, man, what he's done is
It's
insane.
amazing, yeah.
You know,
That's a great. I mean, I mean, really, I mean, John Astin is just, I mean, wow. I mean, he is the epitome of Gomez Adams, and I'm sorry, it's everybody else is a pale imitation.
Yeah, no, what he
Um,
did was he took this character and made it like you can't stray from it. So that's why the new Netflix series, I wonder how Luis
yeah.
Guzman's going to do it. He has to play it to
Oh,
that, I would think, or
that's hard to say. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I guess they'll. Everybody sort of brings their own thing. I think it's the reason why there's never been a reboot of the Munsters that's ever worked beyond the original series, and it's because it was fresh material, untested, so it was kind of new for audiences at the time. It took, it was the concept that they used, and it was working class family, who happened to be made of monsters who lived in
yeah.
suburbia, and then and then just sort of like trying to fit into society, which is weird because it's exactly the polar opposite of the Adams family, which is
Yeah.
more. I mean, they're so wealthy that they're bored with life, and that they've gravitated towards the sort of supernatural, sort of like morbid end of life, because I mean they're just so wealthy they could do anything they want, and they live this weird insular life that doesn't they don't really travel too much outside of their own home in on the
And
show, so it's sort of like, but it's it's they're both great shows in their
I
own
just
right.
think the way like to do Herman is hard. Like when you see the colorized version of Herman, like even when they do the old colors of the old ones, I remember in the 90s they did a TV
Yeah,
movie. I'm trying to think who played it. I
yeah,
feel
they
like
did. Well,
somebody big played him.
John, John Shuck, Edward Herman, with Jerry O'Connell now played him and with no makeup.
Oh,
And
yeah, that
and
I
there was
watched that
there was
pilot.
like
That
the
looked good.
animated version. Eh,
It was
I don't
like
know.
different.
I met I had the luck of meeting Fred Gwynn, Yvonne DiCarlo, and Al Lewis all in monster makeup on the Universal backlot when they did their final TV movie, The Monsters Revenge.
Oh my god.
And that was, yeah, a friend of my best friend from school. His dad was Jack Klugman's driver on the Universal lot when he was doing Quincy, and so his dad got Mike and I down on the lot, and but he got us on the lot. Of course, we met everybody on the Quincy stage, and
Wow.
Jack and Robert Ito and all the other actors and the director, and and all that stuff. But somebody grabbed us and said, "Here, you got to come with me," and takes us to another stage. And there's the three of them, Fred and Yvonne and Al, all in makeup, and it was like we got to meet them and talk to them, and it was like, and that's when nobody was carrying a camera with them. So I mean,
Yeah.
we didn't have any way to record it, but it was, and we didn't even get, we didn't even think of asking for a signature or anything like that. It was just one of those random moments, and it's just kind of burned into our memories now. But it's just so odd too, because I mean, years later, I worked on Pet Cemetery,
Yeah.
Fred starred in, and I had worked on Cellar Dweller also, and Yvonne was in that, and I ended up being the associate producer on Jack Klugman's final show. And yeah, it's just kind of a weird, that was a weird day
Did you
that
ever
came
mention it to them? Did you say that to Fred or Yvonne? Like, hey, I met you when I was 12.
Never ever met them. I didn't go, I was only working in the lab on those shows on Pet
Okay.
Cemetery and Dweller. I was working in the labs on those shows, and the set work was way beyond me at that point. And actually, the Cellar Dweller was closer only because we were shooting everything over at John Beekler's studio, because it was just
Nice.
insert for the show, extra monster inserts and transformations and things like that. But they had already shot the film in Italy by that point. The days that Jack was shooting on camera obscura, I was so busy in my lab making a monster a day to get it down. So we lost a week of our schedule, and they just played havoc on everything. And so I ended up, we had to rush everything out and get the monsters like to them a week early, and it was literally waking up in the morning and taking all the parts that we'd made the day before and start putting them together, and by 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. having something to ship down to set, and then start the whole
Jeez.
process for the next monster for the next day. It was nuts, but we made it through on that. But I mean, it's the strangeties of life.
I know. So how did it begin? Obviously, you lived out there. How far from like Hollywood did you grow up?
I mean, I was born well, I mean, I was born in Glendale, which is just north of Hollywood, or just sort of northeast or whatever of Hollywood, in Los Angeles suburb basically. And then my early life, I was living in a town north of that called La Crescenta, and that's sort of where I grew up, from being a real little kid to being in a teenager, which then we moved back down to Glendale, and that's sort of where I spent the rest of my teen years and childhood and stuff. But for me, I found out that I got in the business because of a film called Equinox. I saw it in the theater when it came out originally in 1971 here in Los Angeles, and it just blew me away. And the morning that it come on, I'd seen Dave Allen and Dennis Muren on a local morning news program, and Dave had Taurus with him, and I think Dennis had the Asmodeus flying demon creature and model, and it blew me away to see Dave moving the Taurus model, and I built one for myself. So I
That's
built a stop
awesome.
motion myself, and yeah, it's kind of fun to get to sort of live out that childhood fantasy.
So what was your first step after that? Did you know right away? Because was this right around the same time you went on set with your buddy, like around that
Well,
same
no, I knew what
age?
I wanted. This is like 1971 is when because I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, I got monster crazy because of my brother who he got out of monsters. He kind of was the first one. He got a Frankenstein kit. He got an Aurora, model kit, and I saw it
Nice.
and I flipped out and I was like, wow. And he got out of it pretty quickly. I mean, he was maybe in monsters for like 5 minutes of his life, and I grabbed a hold of it, and it stuck with me. And I think my first kit was the King Kong kit, and I remember having that original Godzilla in fuchsia, which was not which is in this purple plastic, not green, and it was really an odd choice for a color for it. But we, like I said, I mean, I'd seen King Kong on television, I'd seen Seventh Voyage of Sinbad on television, and my grandparents took me to see a movie called The Projected Man, which was produced by a guy named Richard Gordon, who did Feeding Without a Face and
Oh, okay.
stuff, shot over in England, and so I don't, remember seeing stuff like that, television and stuff. But when I saw Equinox, it threw me for a loop because it was so weird and so ethereal and so grounded and so um, I mean, it was fantastic, yet it didn't really play up to too much of its fantastic nature in times, and it seemed kind of normal but weird, and it had these great stop motion monsters in it. I mean, really great sequence sequences in it, but some of them were a little more crude than others. But I mean, the guys were shooting in garages and pool houses and backyards and and stuff like that, wherever they could shoot, to get the shots. And but I found out that Equinox was shot like just really close to where I lived. I mean, there were shots done just a few miles from where I lived, like the house I lived in at the time in La Crescenta, and the bridge shots are in La Crescenta, and as well as underneath the bridge. And then I spent years going to a place. My dad had an archery club he belonged to, and we used to go there like one Sunday a month. And it turned out to be where they shot most of the original film. All of the Green Giant shots were, mixed scale shots were all done there. And it turns out I used to eat my lunches off of those picnic tables that they used for the set. And
Oh my god.
yeah, but it was through I met Forey Ackerman and it turns out Farley lived fairly close to where we were, so my mom would take me down there, and eventually I just started bussing it down there. And he called me one night. Farley called me one night and said, "Hey, you want to come down and meet Ray Harryhausen on New Year's Eve?" And I'm like, "Yeah, great. I love And so here I'm, like 14-year-old kid, and my mom takes me down there, and we there and meet Ray. It's just, I mean, Ray is just, I mean, they say don't meet your heroes, but they're not talking about Ray Harryhausen. I mean, he really lived up to his status in each and every way. But I met a guy there who he'd been working at the Berman Studios on uh, Empire of the Ants and things like that, and so he got me in on Kingdom of the Spiders, and from there I started. That's when it started going. I met Jim Danforth, and then David Allen, and then Dennis Muren, and it turns out they all lived like just miles away from where I was living. I just looked them up in the phone book and would call them, and so for years I was just talking to these guys and corresponding with them. And then Dennis Muren invited me to his house. He called me one night and said, I'm leaving Los Angeles. I'm moving up north because ILM's going up there, and we're going to start on Empire Strikes Back. So I'm moving out of Los Angeles area, but I'm having one more Equinox party here at the house, and invited me over. And a friend of mine and I went over there, and it was the original version of Equinox, not the Harris version he was showing. He was showing his original cut of
Yeah.
it on 16 millimeter, his personal 16 millimeter copy of it. It was amazing. I mean, it was so cool seeing that. 1978, and I'm, never thought I'd see that. Mark McGee had already had me over to his place and showed me Rear Window, trying to cure me of the Equinox curse. He took me out that day, and we went down to Hollywood, and he took me to Bronson Cave to show me the cave, and took me to places where they had shot Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And we went to some of the collectors' bookstores, and I had found some photos from Equinox, some 8x10s, and I went, "Look what I'm going to buy." And Mark holds out this photo of Pam Grier in front of my face and says, "You should be paying attention to this, not Equinox." Yeah, because he would always tell me, he said, out of all the good films in the world, why Equinox? But yeah, my fiance said because I'm a weirdo. Yeah. I think we all are in some ways, but it was,
Yeah.
but that was just a lucky fluke that the film that got me inspired to do this. I ended up meeting all the guys and becoming friends with them, and I even corresponded with Jack Harris for a while, and he sent me a bunch of stuff, and eventually I worked on the remake of The Blob.
I know, that's amazing.
So yeah,
So what was your first step? So you're 21, give or take, in like 78. So what was the next time?
got 78. I was still 16. As I say, I didn't turn 20 until 82.
Oh,
So I was, I
okay.
think, 16 or 17. I was like
Jesus.
I was young, I was really young. And
Yeah.
growing up in Glendale turned out to be a great thing because all my neighbors were actors. My mom was friends with a local lady, and their last name was Uriosti. And it turns out that the husband was a guy named Frank Uriosti. He was like an Oscar-winning editor. And it was just, an editor at the time. I don't know if he'd won his Oscar by that point, but he was, I think eventually became an Oscar-winning editor and stuff. But he knew what I was into. My mom had said, my son's into movies and this and that, monster movies and stuff like that. And I was over there one day, and he tells me, he goes, he says, when I was working in the editorial department at Universal Studios, like back in the 1960s, early 60s, he goes, one of the films I worked on was King Kong versus Godzilla. So I was blown away by that. It was so cool. And then um, uh, eventually, after Star Wars, one of the editors, Richard Shue, him and his family moved about 3 houses away from us. We became really good friends with them, and I used to go down and keep an eye on his kids when him and his wife would go out. And he'd let me hold his Oscar, and so I used to get to hold his Star Wars Oscar, and and stuff like that. I mean, that was kind of see, that's like the weird childhood that I had. I don't. It's weird. I work in film now, but I don't have like the cool childhood that I had when I was a kid. It was all sort of like I'm sort of like maybe I'm just too aloof about it now. I mean, I do get starstruck every once in a while. I mean, every once in a while you can't help but meet somebody that you go, wow, that's so cool. Like Guy Rolfe or
How about James Best?
James Best. Yes, James was awesome. James was so cool.
I interviewed his niece, who was in that movie too, Jennifer Lyons.
Oh, really? That's the Return of the Killer Shrews. What a what a thing that was. I mean, I was doing Universal Soldier 4 at that time. I got the contract to do all the prosthetic stuff in my lab, and then it shipped out to my friend who was heading up the makeup department in Louisiana, and like right in the middle of it. That was that was already like a 12-week job to begin with, but right in the middle of it, I mean, Steve Latshaw. I think either Steve Latshaw or Dan Golden contacted me. It's probably Steve first who contacted me and said, "Hey, I'm doing Return of the Killer Shrews. You want to get involved?" And I went, "Well, yeah." And first of all, I mean, it was just it was a really low budget job. I mean, I built that thing, and what you see in the film is you don't see much of what I did in the film. I mean, I did a lot of makeup effects stuff in it. Rick Hurst's son gets his arm ripped off, and a few other things like that. But the shrew that I built, you only get to see it certain times, which actually I like a lot. I thought it worked out pretty well because it's really only just a head and shoulders puppet, and I built some gloves to go with it. And I wanted to do a little bit more, but honestly, it was like with so little money, I don't think I could afford all the fur. So the fur that I had was that's all the fur that I had, I think, at the time, and it was sort of like I can't afford to buy any more for this thing.
Yeah.
But no, it really ended up being a fun thing to be involved in, and I'm really happy because I mean, how many times does a person get an opportunity to get involved in a show that is a sequel to, I mean, one of the classic 1950s, monster movies. Everyone seems to know the killer. Even my dad knew it. My dad remember seeing it, and when he was a kid, but it's one of those films that just seems like a lot of people know, just mostly by reputation. The dogs and fursuits, and then this one they did CG, for it. And I mean, honestly, the guys, I mean, they didn't have much to work with, and they did the best they could with it. And but it was nice that I got to see my design translated into these dimensional puppets that could be utilized more than unfortunately what mine could. Mine had a few movements in the face and stuff like that. But like I said, it was fun, and there were a lot of good people on it. And I only went on set again a few days because my God, I did 12 weeks. I did 8 shows in at that time, like web series, short films, features, TV movies. I had like 12 shows. I mean, 8 shows in a 12-week period. I didn't have a day off in that amount of time. And I think I worked minimum of 16-hour days. I was living in my studio at the time. And then when I got my final check and was finished for the Universal Soldier job, I think I was offered another job, and I turned it down. It was just like a sculpting job or something like that. But I turned it down, and I took a week, and I flew to North Carolina, and I met the girl who I'm going to marry. So that was
way.
It was nice. We'd already been talking, and
that's awesome.
And it wasn't really I went out there for any real intention, but it just we got to meet each other. I just went out and meet new people and just go to a different place. I'd never been there, and I just wanted to go somewhere different and have a nice enjoyable week and of no stress, no movie stuff. Yeah, it worked out great. It was like really nice and very good people. Good family. So very, very, very nice people. I'm very proud to know all of them. So.
Nice. So Jeff, how did you, obviously you had all those people around you, and you had all those people that were at your disposal for like information. How did you get to, what was your steps to actually making it a career, like getting onto your first set? Obviously you worked in 77 on Kingdom of the Spiders, but what was like your first step after that?
Well, the first step was like the first 10 years after that first job was I'd work for my dad's sheet metal shop. I was working for my dad's sheet metal shop, and that was my day job. And then things would pop up. Maybe a short film would come up, or in '84, a friend of mine calls me. This is a guy that I'd met who had been working down at Roger Corman's on Galaxy of
Nice.
Terror. A guy
This
named
is a
Gene
Roger Corman
Turnbow.
movie right here.
That's awesome. Oh, Munchie, excellent. That's Gabe Bartalos' Munchie there.
Oh, it is? Yeah, Jim Wynorski directed. I interviewed a few people that worked on it.
They were running the original one on like one of the streaming channels the other day, and that was all Robert Short stuff. The little Mayan puppet things
Oh,
from
the
Tubi.
original Munchies.
Yeah,
That's the
the
original
original
movie.
Munchies. Yeah, and then the Munchie is that's Gabe Bartalos's. Like when they did when Jim Wynorski I think did that, or
Yep.
yeah, good old Jim. He's awesome. But no, but it was like 10 years. Like I said, in '84, this Gene calls me one day, and I had a studio at that time. A friend of mine had rented a place on Santa Monica Boulevard, and we are making a promo film to try to sell to MTV, and for something we're trying to sell to MTV. And so I had a nice little studio set up. My friend calls me and says, "Hey, I got this job. It's not much money. I'm going to take the money." And I'd like for you to build this stuff. And I'm like, sure, why not? He says, I'll get you all this stuff. He said, I just don't really have a place to do it. And here's, and I know you have space, and would you mind making this stuff? And I was like, great. So I built this, like a shoulder mounted parrot, like that would, a little cable control that would run down the guy's arm, and he could move the head and the beak on it. And I made this little award ceremony. Well, not really a statue, but it was kind of supposed to be like this fictional television award for this big ceremony, kind of an Emmy type ceremony. And I didn't finish off the parrot because I'm never been good at dealing with feathers. Hair and feather and all that stuff just drives me nuts. I could do it, but it's just like, ugh. I like to hire other people to do it, but it turned out to be Danny DeVito's directorial debut thing. He and Rhea Perlman starred in, called The Ratings Game. And it's like this.
Oh, nice.
It was Showtime's first made for cable TV movie, and it's hilarious. I just finally got a copy of it on DVD a couple of years ago. I hadn't seen it in years, and it's got like stars like from like 50 years before, and people now like Jerry Seinfeld's got a small part in it,
Wow.
and and stuff like that. So it's got all these like different people in it, I mean, I never thought I'd ever see Steve Allen and Jane Meadows holding this awards prop that I'd made. It was like so weird to see people of that caliber working with stuff that I made.
Yeah.
But time went on, and I was hanging out. I was doing stuff for a band called TSOL. I used to go down and do makeups for them and things like that back in my punk rock days. And it was I'll admit, for a long time it was tough looking for a job, only because just nerves. Trying to get up the nerve to really think that you're good enough to get involved and do this stuff. It takes it takes a great leap of faith and a lot of
Yeah.
confidence to do it, which I lacked both of at the time. And no, but I finally did. I called Makeup Effects Lab one day, not thinking there'd be any chances, because I was living fairly close to them. And I gave them a call, and Doug White answers, and I said, "Well, hi, I'm Jeff Farley, and I'm looking to see if you guys have any work." He says, "How much can you work for?" Or can you? And I gave him this price, and he says, "I'll pay you $100 more a week, and you just get up here." And I spent a couple of weeks working on it. We were doing a commercial, building this giant shark for a commercial. Which didn't, the commercial didn't last for too long. I think it's online. these days, but it was kind of an interesting little job. But the other job was a TV movie with Barbara Eden called The Stepford Children. It was one of the Stepford movies, the sequels
Yeah.
to the Stepford Wives. And so we were building all these like artificial humans and dummy heads and uh, and
Is
we
that the
did
first time that you did that? Or did you practice that in
that
your
was
own
the
lab
first
that you had?
that well something. I mean, yeah, I'd made little molds and I'd made noses and I'd made little things, and like I got a short film I made a skull that this with the gelatin skin that you could like pull wires and the skin would slide off the skull, similar to
Nice.
Ghost Story and things like that. Things I was reading in Cinemagic and Cine Fantastic and Fangoria and Famous Monsters, and any bit of information I get to make something on these films. But on the Stepford Children, it was just, I was surprised that I made it through because the days were so long, and I was thinking to myself, I'm never going to make it through this night. This is going to kill me. I'm going to I'm in my early 20s. I'm still thinking I'm going to die because it's just like we're just so killer. The hours are so deadly, and you're just pushing yourself. It was a great crew, though. I mean, so many good people there, and I met a lot of people who had already been working a number of years in the business, and some that were a little bit newer who had already been working on films like House and other films, of that nature, and so I get to be good friends with a lot of these people, and
Nice.
and but we did one final 24-hour push. We do like this, or it's like maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's over a 12-hour. Maybe it felt like 24 to me, but we do an
Yeah.
all-nighter, and it's like 5 or 6 in the morning. Maybe it's like maybe it was around 5 in the morning or something. And they get everybody together. Everybody gather together for this meeting, and we go in and we're like standing there, and they go, "Here, we're gonna pick. We need to pick the crews to go to these different sets. One for this commercial, and the other for the Stepford Children." So now here's the problem: if you get picked for this commercial, that's it. You go right to set. Like Hardy's pulled an all-nighter, and then you're going all the way up to like Valencia, for set work for another 12 or 14 or 16-hour day, whatever it takes to get done. And if you get picked for the Stepford Children, that's not until later that night. It's a night shoot, so it's like you get the day to rest. And when they called me for the Stepford Children, I was so grateful. I was like, yes, I
Yes.
could go home and get some sleep. And they were shooting. I was living in North Hollywood at the time. I mean, just near Lancashire Boulevard, and they were shooting just down at Griffith Park, so it wasn't too far. I didn't even have a car. I think one of the guys just picked me up and drove me down there, and we were doing our shots and getting set up and doing our setups and our dummies on the table in the lab, and Barbara Eden was there, and I mean, just working with her was just, I mean, amazing because she's so kind, such a nice lady, and I mean, she was just a pleasure to work with, and we're doing our little gags and stuff like that. And we had a thing where these dummies break loose and they come to life, and they're not dummies, but they're like synthetic humans, and they look like they're skinned, kind of muscle, the skin bodies basically. And there were these puppets that we had built, and we get up set up for a shot where they're in the car. Barbara, maybe Barbara's in the passenger seat or somebody. They're in. I think it's supposed to be Barbara's dummy, so I think she's in the passenger seat, and suddenly, all of a sudden, this thing pops up to the window. They lock the doors, and they're in the car, and this thing pops up and banging on the window, trying to get at her, and so they want this dummy to be steaming. They want this thing to appear like it's steaming, give it some extra life, and so the way they decide to do it is there's some AB smoke. Spray one component on. That's like, and you spray the other component on, and once they combine, automatically it's smoke. It's like essentially it's mustard gas. It's ammonia
Yeah.
and bleach essentially. And we get set up, and Doug is the main puppeteer, and he's got everybody else, and I'm slime boy essentially. That's my job. And I'm the most, I'm the lowest man of the totem pole. So the most important job they can give me is to deal with the slime, slime up the puppet. So I do all that and get ready to do the shot. And the effects guy, I think they've already put one of the components on the dummy, but but then the effects guy has to step in and spray the second component on just as they call roll. And they do that, and the guy sprays it, and Doug immediately grabs his eyes, and he got the chemical in his eyes. One of the two, either bleach or ammonia, one of the two in his eyes, and he gets sent to the hospital. I get bumped up to puppeteer, and we shoot this, and then safety goggles are passed out, and then we do the shot. And it was really, I mean, I was glad to see Doug. Doug was okay, luckily. Luckily, it was nothing damaging, and it was their obligation to take care of it because it was their mistake that that it happened. But gratefully he was okay. So, and then he was back, and we finished everything up, and so it was great. It was like a lot. I mean, I think that was probably my first real big set job.
Yeah.
So that was the end of '86, and then before I knew it, by the next month, I was, the guys, the crew at Make Effects Lab wanted me to come up to Kenny Myers on Return of the Living Dead 2. I had a horrible interview with Kenny. He didn't want to hire me. I drove down to Van Nuys, and I'd already interviewed with Lance Anderson prior, and I called Lance and I said, hey, I have some new stuff. Would you mind seeing it? He says, sure, come over. I said, I'm just a few blocks away. He says, sure, come on over. And I go over, and by the next morning, I was working on The Serpent and the Rainbow. And then that was it. It was a full-time job after that.
After that, that was like the turning point?
That was the turning point. And by full-time up to this point, I mean, there are great stretches of downtime because we never work all the time. It looks like we work more than we do. By virtue of the fact that sometimes we do so many things during the year, and it looks like we're always doing something, but there's always lots of downtime and where you're panicking and trying to figure out like how am I going to pay my bills and stuff like that. But that's life,
Yeah. I know you mentioned it before. Obviously, we can't talk about like everything on here, but one that you mentioned before, and I think I rewatched it a couple weeks ago, but The Blob.
Sure.
That movie, what that does when you compare it to the original, which is great. Obviously, Steve McQueen as a high school kid in the movie, which I don't know how old he was at the time, but he played like a 17-year-old high school
27, I think, at the time or something.
That's not that bad off.
I mean, it wasn't that far off from being.
That's normal.
You could make them college students; it'd be just as like believable. But high school, was the thing at the time. So,
but Kevin Dillon crushes it in that role in The Blob, and the effects are amazing. Every single one of them are just like, and they're all so different. Like when you have the kid that's making the phone call, just the way his body is just getting contorted, or you have what's her name? I can't think of her name. Alina. She was on Baywatch for years, and she was in a bunch of stuff.
Erica Oleniak. I was actually
that's her name. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked on that scene. I was behind the seat when Ricky Paul Golden, like his hand goes in her chest and those tentacles pop out.
Yeah.
A guy, the late Tony Ruprecht and I, or Anton Ruprecht and I, were in the back seat pushing those tentacles out of that dummy for that shot. But I had just got back from Italy, from 3 months in Italy for John Beekler, and come back, and John was doing Friday the 13th part 7 at that time. He was doing 7 at the time, and I was out of a job. He had enough people, and I was out of a job, and I went, where am I going to go? And I called the Blob Shop, and they hired me immediately. I think I did a couple of weeks off, and then I was down at the Blob Shop for only about a month and a half. I mean, I can't think that I was on that show more than a month and a half, and I felt like I was on it for a year. It was just so much stuff. We had a shop in Hollywood, just off of Hollywood Boulevard, which was was called the Blob Shop, and that's where everybody prepped everything and all the work was done. And we would have, I mean, not every day, but there were quite a few times I recall the hot melt vinyl that they were melting down would catch fire, and because it produces such a toxic smoke, they'd have to evacuate the building, which meant like 50 or 60 or 80 of us like suddenly like out on the streets of Hollywood for 3 hours wandering around because we got nowhere we can't, we still got to go back to work, and we're like, we're just going to, so we just kind of like go to all the bookstores and, comic book places, and maybe go see a movie or something in the middle of the day, or, but eventually I started going in the morning down to Hollywood, drive from Glendale to Hollywood, go work for a few hours there at that shop. And then I'd drive from Hollywood to Valencia, and I'd spend a few hours working on the first unit shots. And then I'd drive from Valencia to Simi Valley, all the way to the end of Simi Valley where Dream Quest was, and I'd spend the rest of the day working on the puppet unit, like the miniature unit. And I did about 3 weeks of that. And Lance Anderson called me one morning. I said, I'm taking the day off. I called in sick or something. I said, I've got to rest. And Lance Anderson called me that day and said, hey, I just got the new James Bond movie, and do you want to come work on it? And I said, yes. I said, let me call the shop. And I gave him a 2-week notice, and then I went over to Lance's and ended up over there, working on that. But I'll tell you, when I worked on the Blob, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we did that's in the show. I mean, and they still went on a long time after us. I mean, is this a show that never seemed to have an end because they couldn't figure out like really how they were going to get their shots done. They really kind of were, a lot of it was they were just sort of guessing things in some way.
Well, it's Chuck Russell, right?
Yeah, Chuck directed it, and Chuck's a funny guy. I mean, he's really interesting because he has a tendency to really get bent out of shape easily and become, I mean, he becomes a screamer. And I mean, he screamed at Shawnee Smith, and he screamed at Mark Irwin, the cinematographer, and he screamed at this person and that person. And then we got down to, I had been picked to do a test scene, the scene where Ricky Paul Golden, the blob, hits him. All the slime hits him in the face. Well, that was shot in a car that was on a gimbal rig that was, and the car was on its side. Like they lifted the car up and had a gimbal rig, and it was like rotated on its side, on its axis, so that we could stand on a scaffold and dump a 5-gallon bucket of slime on them and let gravity do the work. But they wanted to test it first, so I got picked for the test. Now, I didn't have to sit in the car because they didn't want to get the car messy. So they took me outside and laid me out on a plank between two ladders, and I'm lying there, and I get 5 gallons of slime dumped on me. And the first thing is, my first reaction is I start laughing because it's so absurd. And Chuck started screaming, "You're supposed to be scared! Scared! Be scared! You're supposed to be scared!" Like that. And then he goes, "Clean him up and do it again." So I had to do it a second time for him, and then I had to scream and do all that stuff. And it was just something. But I'll be honest with you, I think he's a really good director, and I think that he's, I mean, as a producer, he was really good. He had some really good shows. I mean, Hell Night and Dreamscape and Back to School and. And the direct. I thought The Mask was a good film too. I liked that a lot.
Yeah,
The Mask was a really fun film.
He's done a lot of different stuff, and his buddy Frank Darabont,
sure,
they have that kind of personality. I think it's passion, but maybe they just don't know how to harness it. So I've interviewed a few people that worked on The Mist, and they said how he can get.
Sure, Frank. It was so funny because we watched the Hell Night, and you see go the end crawl credits. So you see production assistants, and right in the middle of it is Frank Darabont. Frank started as a PA on Hell Night.
Yeah.
It's like it's amazing where he can start and where you can get. J.J. Abrams started with Don Dohler, and look at him now.
Yeah, J.J. Abrams is writing that. He wrote that Mel Gibson movie, the one. Man, I'm trying to think of the name of the movie. It was early '90s, like when he was in college.
Oh
He wrote
yeah,
this
yeah.
Mel
Well,
Gibson movie that I think the one when he had like amnesia or something. I don't
oh
know, some
sure, yeah.
weird
Well,
movie.
J.J. Abrams' first film was it Night Beast? It was Don Dohler's
Oh,
Night
that was his
Beast.
first one.
That was his first film. He was like a music. He did some like I don't know. It was like music editing, or he was like sort of worked in the music, like track or something for it like that. But that was sort of where he started. And he still talks about Don Dohler. He's one of the rare filmmakers who got as far as they got, farther than anyone could have ever imagined they got, and he still talks about where he started. And that
That's
says a lot
awesome.
about it. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, he was working on Shrek. I interviewed this guy Tim Lawrence.
Yeah. Oh, Tim. Yeah. Sure. I remember Tim Lawrence. He had a job
Yeah,
on
I
this.
interviewed him like a year before he passed,
Mhm.
and yeah, he was telling me about like in '94 he was working on Shrek with J.J. Abrams, like in some
Yeah.
garage that he had rented or something
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. It's so funny too because I'm back east with my fiance, and we go to a music festival like whenever they can have it now,
Yeah,
but and visit her parents, and somebody there was somebody that we know. Their family knows the Abrams family. I mean, and they knew JJ when he was a kid. It's just like it's so weird. It's so weird how this world works, and sometimes
yeah,
it all comes. You meet people. You just never the people that you meet. You never know what the stories are going to tell you.
yeah. No, you never know who you're gonna meet. Me and my wife were on
Yeah.
our honeymoon, and we were at a bar in Iceland in Reykjavik, and they were
Hmm.
filming Fast and the Furious 8 at the time. Like we
Yeah.
didn't know that, but the guy at the bar was one of the cameramen, and we were talking to him for hours. He was
Mm.
telling me about how he sets up all the cameras in the cars, but no, you never know. That's why you just talk to strangers, and you can learn a lot about them.
Sure. My fiance's dad had the same experience in London, and he was probably found met some. I think he met some Americans. Either I think yeah, they were Americans or maybe Canadians working over doing some visual effects on some film over there. And he met them in a bar, and they started talking. And he mentions my name, and one of them goes, "I know who he is. I know." It was so weird. It's so odd. I don't know because here I am. I'm sitting. I'm not good. I feel like I'm virtually a nobody, and then somebody like goes, and it's like, and it's like I said, it's an odd business. It's a
Well, so many people
strange
go
way to
into
earn a
a
living.
show, so that's why like I interviewed this guy. His nickname's Audio Andy. He's a sound mixer. He worked on a
Mhm.
few full moon movies that you were on. I mentioned your name and he remembered you.
Do you remember which shows those were?
It was one of the Evil Bong movies.
Oh, sure, yeah. It
Yeah, he
might
worked
have
on a
been.
bunch of those, and he did like a lot of the David Dakotu, like a talking.
But something. I bet you met my fiance too. Then, because she was on those movies with me also. I mean, the second one, but by the time I did the fourth and fifth one, she was there with me,
Yeah,
and she was getting to be part of the whole thing.
the
Become
whole
part of the
thing.
family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I interviewed one of the girls, the adult film star Jillian Jansen in one of the scenes.
There
She
she is.
like,
There's my fiance.
"Hi, how are
Hi.
you?" And Jillian Jansen like is with this Elvis, like this guy that's dressed like a 7 foot tall Elvis. Bizarre, bizarre. So you do the Blob, and then like one of the sequels, because obviously when you work on so many shows, your IMDb doesn't say like, oh, he was on this for a day or he just did something for a week. But one I had to ask you about out of that list was Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare.
Sure. Yeah, that one I had just finished another sequel for John Buechler at that point. I had just finished supervising To Die For 2. for him,
Nice.
the vampire flick, and he had Freddy's Dead going, so he had work to do in the shop, and so he brought me in, and I was really tasked with building this animatronic puppet of Freddy. It didn't really have to do much because it was for a quick shot, but it was towards the end of the film in the 3D sequence, and his daughter hits him in the face with a pipe. So what they wanted was his cheek would pop open and these tentacles would like come out. Now, I'm like not really an animatronics guy. I mean, I can fudge some little things and stuff, but first of all, I mean, John has me like work from a mold that just didn't, it was just kind of like, this isn't working for me, but I had to make a fiberglass head out of it and cover it with Freddy appliances. It's only later I found the silicone mold of Robert Englund's head sitting there I could have used. It would have been a heck of a lot easier for me to use
Yeah.
that. And it actually turned out okay looking, and for the shot it kind of worked because we had to really do something weird. Like I had to sit on a scaffold above Lisa Zane, and I'm like over her shoulder, and they've got the camera below, the 3D camera below, and so they could get the proper angle. And I needed to have that, so because the tentacles really, we're hitting them with compressed air to get them moved, because they're really just like I think they were just like fishing lures that I used basically for it, and then I would use a cable to suck them back in, and then they would do a reverse shot for them popping out, and then we go see the movie and it's not there. Shot's completely gone. It's like, but I did a lot more set work on that too. We did Chris Robinson and I did a day with, or Chris Robbins and I did a day with the James Earl Jones was there, and that was a fun scene. We had to do a scene with him and Robert, and we did some shots up in Lake Hollywood in the Hollywood Hills, and that's where Roseanne and oh god, what was his name?
Tom.
I worked, and again to Tom Arnold. Yeah, I worked with They were both there. It's funny because I did another show with Tom Arnold, and it was like, what is his name? Yeah, so I mean, we did some, we did some interesting stuff. We did like, I think the best gag though, I really think the one that really stood out for me was the one Rod Matsui did with Carlos and the little bug, the
Oh,
little, his hearing aid thing.
yeah.
That was just a really cool gag, and it took a lot of work, and his stayed in the movie and mine got cut out. So
So, like, who are the people, like, when you're in this? Obviously, Hollywood, no matter what level you're at, it's connections. And obviously, your previous work, was it like a lot of John Beekler? And then who else? Because it looks like you were doing, I don't know if John worked on like Death Warrant or Lionheart. It seems like you did like a few action movies for the next like 5, 6 years too.
sure. Well, I mean, like I said, I'd start over. I mean, well, actually, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit, because before I did that makeup effects lab job in the Stepford show, I forgot I'd already worked with James Cummins on a Twilight Zone
Oh,
episode. From the 1980s Twilight Zone, and it was an adaptation of a Stephen King story called Grandma, and the adaptation was by Harlan Ellison, and James got called in after they shot it, and they said, we need a monster for this. What we had, we weren't happy with, and so now we need something new. And then we had a week to build an entire suit. So I'd already met some people there and stuff like that. But by that time, so I was working. I did some films with James Cummins after that, Speak of the Devil, and um, I was working. Lance Anderson would call me up and hire me back, and then I was working for another shop called Precision Effects, which did mostly live stage shows and things for Disney and Disneyland and things like that, costume work. They did the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles coming out of their Shells tour costumes. So I was
and
working on one.
you worked on that?
I worked on one iteration of that. When they went to
Oh my
Colombia, when they went
god.
down to South America, I worked on those suits. I didn't go to South
Okay.
America, but I was working on those suits um, and so I was working for for boutique shops like that, and then um, I did a work for a guy named Larry Carr, and it was a trade show job. Really, I won't go into details on it, but Larry is a great guy, and Larry had been working like at Real Effects. He worked on Friday the 13th Part 5 and a bunch of other shows. He was in the business, but he is sort of edging out of the business, doing more like art stuff, full scale sculptures and for bronzes and doing Halloween. He like was doing early Halloween stuff, and he had this
Okay.
little shop down. He had this little shop down in Orange County, and he hired a friend of mine. And then my friend got me and a bunch of other guys to come down and to work on this thing. And Larry's a great guy. I mean, really, just a really cool guy. And after I finished with him, I don't know how long I went by, but Alec Gillis from ADI contacted me and said, "Hey, we're going to do a Tales from the Crypt episode. You want to come work on it?" I was like, "Sure." So I ended up going over to ADI for a long time, also on shows like Death Becomes Her and Demolition Man
Nice.
and Wolf and shows like that. Big high profile, big budget, prestige shows. But yeah, I mean, I got the Death Warrant job was a Lance Anderson job. I think it was after I went to Japan with Screaming Mad George on a show. Because in '89 I went to a show. I went to Japan with George to do a show. I came back. Lance hired me for a show called After Midnight. No, I was already working on After Midnight before I went to Japan. I came back and finished up on After Midnight. And then Lance had Death Warrant come in, the Jean Claude Van Damme film. We did a bunch of work on Patrick Kilpatrick for that.
Oh, I chatted with him. Yeah, you did his facial.
I've done a bunch of shows with him. I
Oh
always seem to
yeah.
run into that guy. He loves Maggie, and so we always seem to run into each other. Sometimes even just like not non-work situations, and
Nice.
but the makeup the makeup department head on that show was a lady named Nina Kraft, and she told me, she goes, "I'm going on to Jean Claude's next film after this, which is Lionheart." And she says, "I'd like to hire you to do the prosthetics for it." And I had a little lab in my garage and stuff, and I was thrilled to do it. And so I ended up making, Harrison, oh, what was his last name? He was in Carnosaur also. He played the sheriff in it. But I wish I could remember Harrison Page, I believe, was his name. And so I did prosthetics for him, some really subtle pieces and a gold tooth, and went down, did some stuff for them, and then they went to Vegas, and I thought that was done. And then I get a call a day after they get to Vegas. They say, "Jean Claude, I added something. Can you help us out?" I was like, "Can you make a hand that gets stabbed?" And I went, "I'll call you right back." And I call my back. I go to my backyard, and this is a true story. My backyard. Before that point, a guy named Scott Coulter and I were living there at that house. Scott was from New York. He did movies like Street Trash and Class of Nukem High and
Nice.
Slime City, and he did all those really cool lowbrow horror films in New York in the '80s. I mean, a really great makeup effects artist, a really great guy. The guy's a true renaissance man of effects. I'll tell you that much, because he's doing digital work now and stuff like that. But Scott had took an arm mold. He wanted said he I'm gonna when he was living at the house. He said, "I want to do an experiment," and he casts a polyfoam arm out, or latex and polyfoam arm or something, out of this mold, and digs a hole in our backyard and buries this arm in our backyard. And I walk out in my backyard to the spot where he's buried this arm, and I dig it out, and it's still there, and surprisingly it's in pretty good condition. I said, "Yeah, I could do this." And literally I was supposed to ship it out to them, and they said, like, next thing you know, they call me and say, can you just fly out here tonight? So we're sending you a ticket. We're just gonna we're gonna just fly you out here tonight. And you're gonna stay here for a few days and do these things for us, and then whatever we need, and then we'll pay you, and you can go home. And I'm like, great. So yeah, so
Yeah.
I was doing stuff like that, and I got to see Jean Claude, do more of his stuff, and that's always fun. He's always practicing and stuff, so I always get to watch him high kick or do something. He was
Do you
pleasant
have
though.
any, like, obviously you have, like, if you add them all together, over 300 credits that you've done work, some crossover, I think, on some jobs, but do you have like a favorite thing that you got to do over the years? I don't know if it was like a creature or
It's like if I had to it's so tough because
I'm sure.
it's there's been a lot of really good opportunities. I think technically, I'd say technically the best thing, my favorite thing, sort of artistically and technically, because I just had such, really outstanding crew on it. We had far less time that was hoping that we would get. Yeah, less money and less time that I was hoping that we would get to do it, and it turned out amazing. It was a Sci-Fi Channel movie called Stanley's Lightspeed, and it starred Jason Connery, who I just like literally I did 3 movies back to back with Jason. That was the second of the 3 picture deal I had with him. But we went to Utah to shoot that, and it was just a great time. Such an easy job too. The prosthetics. I took a guy named Ross Talent out there with me, and it's just we had a great time working on it. I asked for 4 weeks to build it. I had 18 days to put this an entire full original body suit, like foam latex body suit, um, full head, like cowl, mask, gloves. They never showed him in full body too many times either, which was just outstanding because it just meant that all we had to do was slip a pair of gloves on him and glue, slip a cowl over his head and glue a thing to his face and go to craft service, hang out and touch him up every once in a while. It was a really great experience. And the executive producer, Jeff Franklin, I can't thank him enough for trusting me with it and really giving me a really good opportunity.
And just like the time that you were doing it, I interviewed another guy that worked with John Beekler a lot. This guy,
Mm-hmm.
Eddie Yang.
Oh,
He
sure, Eddie.
was,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's like,
His story is similar to yours because he worked on Predator when he
yeah,
was on like winter break in like, I
yeah,
think he was
because he was a kid.
17.
Yeah, he was like
Yeah.
a kid. I remember meeting Eddie. He used to come by Beekler's, and when we were there, I
He
don't know
would
if he
mow
was
the
working.
lawn.
He was, yeah, because I think he was there a little before me, and then he would come by when we were working there, and because and yeah, all these people that come and go, and we ran into. It's been a few years since I run into Steve Wang, but it's like we end up always talking about our time in Italy together,
Yeah.
especially especially when I was playing the butt end of the monster that he was playing. So and and just it's all these really interesting people that you get to work with, and some relationships, it's like friends, friendships.
Oh
Some don't
yeah.
work out as well as you kind of hope they would, and others work out great, and we just make the greatest friends. Yeah, some things get awkward too at times. It's very much like life. But it's really like I mean, had. In Italy one day, Steve Wang walks up to me. It's a Saturday, and he says, "Hey, I got one of the cars. You want to go into Rome? Go into Rome and play some video games?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So he and I just drove into Rome together and hung out for the day. And I just never thought I'd ever do something like that. And it forged all these friendships. When all these young guys together in a foreign country, and we had all this great stuff around us, and working in a studio with all this amazing history. How can you not be taken up by that? And then being there with other Americans, you bond. It becomes a family. And I can't I can't thank Charlie enough, and Beekler enough, and all those guys enough for those opportunities. So
Yeah, no. I think one thing I love about special effects, especially of that day and age, And especially the time that you worked, and I asked Eddie about like the transition, because like you gotta think 91, 92, 93, like even like if you watch the Freddy's Dead documentary, they talk about like doing like CG, like that was like early people trying to attempt to do that. So what was it like that transition? Like me personally, it's so funny when you look at the good CG Jurassic Park, but then ever
Sure.
like around that time, bad CG, you notice it.
Yeah.
Practical, it still holds up.
Well, I think it's funny too because I saw a film the other day and it came out in the '70s and I don't think I'd actually seen it before. It's called Demon Seed. I'd known about it. I just never got a chance to see it until it was on the other day. And I think that I'm not certain if that's the first film that had CG, like some computer animation slipped into it. One of those films around that time, and I know that by the time the last Starfighter came out, all of the space battles, all the starships, all that stuff, those are all digital. Um,
Oh.
so they were experimenting with that stuff at the time and trying to like figure out how the best to make it integrated into film because they knew that well, they're just trying to figure out a cheaper way of doing things, and I don't think that worked out very well for them. And they were kind of
Yeah.
stuck by that. They'd already put so much money into it. They said they would just have to use this stuff, and we'll have to hire 500 people now. We'll have to hire twice the amount of the original crew to do our visual effects. So, but it's not all bad. I think some of the best CG that you see these days is in commercials because they have more money for less time, so they put in more
Yeah.
detail. It's all about layers. The more layers you can add in, the more realistic you can make it look. It's the reason why a lot of the Asylum stuff and those guys work really hard. I won't knock them because they do work really hard. And I know Glenn Campbell, who runs the visual effects department over there, and those are really good. And Glenn's been around for a long, long time since the '70s himself, and so these guys know their stuff, but they kind of know what they're up against. And I think at the end of the day, we're all just like collect a paycheck with them. We're grateful we have a job. We're still doing what
Yeah.
we do, and we're not. I was never made for flipping burgers. I think I tried. I did some things like I worked at the Hollywood Bowl for a season during the summer. That was like my first real job, I think, after my dad, and my first outside
Yeah.
my dad's place job and stuff like that. So I've done things like that. I stripped floors for a while with a guy, like stripping tile floors and stuff like that and refinishing them and stuff. I did jobs like that. I won't say menial, but I just did jobs like that, but always dreaming of doing
Yeah.
this. And the funny thing is that sometimes I'm doing this and I'm going, God, I wish I had another job.
Yeah.
You're already on you're trying to work in, you're trying to say, okay, I'm going to do an 8-hour day today. And by your 12th hour, you're like, oh, that didn't work. Maggie and I were on a job late last year at another shop, and it was for Meta. It was a Super Bowl ad, and
Oh, okay.
a it was a great experience, and it was so killer. The hours were so long, and it was like a minimum 10-hour day, and then we do our 12-hour days, and but I'll be honest with you, it was really well organized, and it was really well taken care of, and the crew were, you know, everybody seemed pretty happy, and it was a good, and it's a really good experience, and especially for Maggie, who, she's looking to do more stuff like this. It was a great experience for her. She did a great,
That's
great job.
awesome, man.
Yeah.
And Jeff, so this has been great, man. So you have a lot coming up. I know IMDb is usually not right, but it looks like you have a lot coming up this year.
And I want to talk about, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the Primevals also, because I know that that's coming up. David Allen's movie, The Primevals, for Full Moon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I had when I met Dave in the late '70s, invited me over to his shop, and they had just begun pre-production on the Charlie Band version of the Primevals. He had already had Raiders of the Stone Ring, and he had his other iterations of that film. Even when Hammer Films had it, it was called Zeppelin versus Pterodactyls. But eventually, in 1978, I go over to Dave Allen's shop, and they've got this arena set built, and they've got lizard men, and they, and they have this mind control gun that a couple lizard men sit in, and cause the Yeti to do whatever they want. And in 1994, my roommate David Matherly had been hired by Full Moon to go over to Romania to go on to do handle the makeup effects for it, because he had been working for Steve Neal on the show, and Mark
Oh,
Rappaport's
Steve
shop
Neal,
was.
I interviewed him.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Steve is a legend, I mean, boy, what that guy's done, it's amazing, so impressive. Mark Rappaport's shop was doing all the other stuff, and then Dave was hired to supervise the location work for both shops over in Romania on it. And then Todd Masters called Dave and said, "Hey, I'm about to do Demon Night, the Tales from the Crypt movie." And Dave went, and that was shooting about 6 blocks away from where we were living. And it was like we were living in Van Nuys, and literally about maybe not that far, maybe 4 or 5 blocks away is the hangar, their airport hangar where they're shooting Tales from the Crypt Demon Night. And Dave makes the choice to go onto that, go over to Todd Masters on that, which leaves the job open for the Primevals, and Dave refers me to it. And I end up going down to Full Moon and talking to them, and they say, "Welcome aboard." And before I know it, I had done a couple of Godzilla jobs. One of them for the '94 Godzilla that never got made. I'd done some work for Sony Imageworks for that. And then about
Wow.
10 days after that finished up, I was on a plane heading to Bucharest. And I spent 9 weeks in Romania with Dave Allen on Primevals. And hear a show that when I was a kid, 14, 15 years old or so, maybe 16 or so, and I'm at his shop seeing all of this stuff. And before I know it, I'm in Romania working on the film, sort of coming full circle. And even then, we shot a lot of it Castel Films, some of it on location up in the Carpathian Mountains. And we shot in the old studio in Romania outside of Bucharest called Bufta Studios. And it's a 1940s, palatial studio that had fallen into disrepair and was being reopened. So we were one of the first productions to go in and shoot some stuff in there. And here is a full-scale version of that mind control gun I saw when I was a kid in 1978. There's like a full-scale one on set. It was so cool to see that. I was just floored. I think I got a couple photos of it somewhere, but it was suddenly, wow, I can't believe it. I saw this when I was a kid, and now here's one in front of me that's like the actual size one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. I'll tell you, working with Dave was amazing because I'd known him since I was a kid, and getting to be there on that, and probably the biggest thrill was when Dave walked up to me one day and he goes, "Robert Cornthwaite is coming in tomorrow to do his part." And I'm like, Robert Cornthwaite is, Dr. Carrington and Thing from Another World, the Howard Hawks, movie. And I was floored. I had no idea he was still with us at that point. He came
Yeah.
in and I got to spend a few days with him. And even then, I mean, that's the best part about this business is the people that you meet. You
Yeah.
get to work with the most amazing people. One more film, mention. I don't know how much more time you got, but was John Buechler's final film, Wizard Dream. It was a pretty amazing experience. Really, we had a lot of problems getting it together. The union came in and tried to shut us down, and the show had to flip, and we got through it, and unfortunately, it's still sitting without any post production done on it all these years later, and we're hoping that it gets done.
Ah.
Somebody picks it up eventually and actually finishes John's final film, because it's all
Dude, they got
shot
to do that.
all All the live action is shot, and all it needs is there was a puppet of a dragon that still needs to be shot. That Tony, that oh my God, God, who was it? There's a puppet that exists. Um, Hopefully, it's still in good condition, and then all the post production stuff, all the sound and visual effects and things like that need to be added. But the most amazing part about that film was Maggie had just moved out here. She comes out to visit with me and end up staying, and that happened to be, I had to run down to set. And so I bring her down to set that day, and it happened to be the first day that Malcolm McDowell had showed up on set because he's the lead in the film, and he shows
Wow.
up to sign his contracts and stuff. And so, and I'm down there just getting our trailer ready for a move. So just packing everything. I'm just getting it ready so they can move the trailer. And so Maggie and I were the only two down there. And here's Malcolm. And then they set up this huge like sushi spread for him for lunch. And he's just like, come join me, come have sushi with me. And he started to be the most amazing person. Just, I mean, he adores Maggie. And it was just, I mean, what a great guy. What an amazing experience to get to work with somebody like that, you know, you're a little, maybe a little intimidated the first time you get to meet them because maybe you've heard things and you're not sure what they're going to be like personality wise. And it just turned out to be the most amazing and kind, really attentive and friendly person and just hardworking. And that's, it's such an amazing thing in this business, getting to meet people like that.
They got to get
So
that made. I interviewed the lady that was a producer on Grizzly 2 way back when they
sure,
shot it back in like 84, 85.
sure,
And I
yeah.
interviewed her because I saw for years, I'm telling you, for years, I've heard like stories about it because I remember my dad showed me Grizzly because right after Jaws went well, they're like, dude, we got to do the same movie, but on land.
I
And then
saw
there's so
Grizzly
many
in the theater.
Jaws, so many ties from Jaws to Grizzly 2. Like the guy that worked on the shark
Sure.
in Jaws worked on
Yeah.
Grizzly 2, and a lot of the stuff didn't work. So
Oh
I
yeah.
saw it was coming out, and I
Yeah.
interviewed her. Like if you see, I don't know, if, you should watch the movie. I don't know how much it is to rent, but
I know that they just finally got a version out because it's been
it came out January
yeah.
2021. It
Well,
came out.
there was that rough cut that was on YouTube, and I watched part of that. It was really rough. It was because there were so many pieces missing. I've sort of
Yeah.
seen some of it, but I would like to watch that finished version. It's so funny too because of what it's like. It's like first films for like what Laura Dern, Charlie Sheen, George Clooney. It was like really early movies for all of
Yep.
them,
And they
and
die right away.
yeah, they all they all get wasted like right away.
You
And
don't see anything. All you see is them like scream, and you see the same. I think the thing that hurt that movie was the shark. I mean, shark. The bear suit that he made in the Jaws guy. It just didn't work. Like, so
yeah,
a lot of the shots are reshown, and it's really just this bear over and over again. It's the same shot because they couldn't use the man bear suit that they had because like the
yeah,
jaws didn't work or something. So no, but she
yeah.
was a cool lady because she worked on that movie. It was like the only movie she ever worked at, and then years later she has money and she goes back and funds a lot of it herself. So that was like the coolest thing about it.
I did hear about that. I did hear about her like wanting to go back in and like and make sure
Yeah, I
trying to get
interviewed
that.
her. Yeah,
That's so cool. Yeah, it's like
it was a cool story.
yeah. I mean, I love stuff like that. I mean, you've heard of a video Asinitis, the guy who did Beyond the Door
Nah.
you ever heard of a movie called Beyond the Door? He did Piranha 2. He produced Piranha
Oh,
2.
okay. I've heard of that.
Omen. But Ovidio Asinitis is an Italian producer. He was born in Egypt, but he was a European producer who, like I said, he did the film. He did a film called Beyond the Door, which Warner Brothers sued for copyright infringement because it was released after The Exorcist. It was shot apparently before The Exorcist, but it came out after The Exorcist, and there's similarities to it. So Warner Brothers sued. And but it stars Juliet Mills, and ironically, I mean, I was in Romania with her for 9 weeks on the Primevals, and completely forgot to ask her about it. But it's, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a worth seeing. Actually, there are two other Beyond the Doors. One that was a film called Shock. Originally, it was Mario Bava's final film. It's the film that he did last. His son Lamberto directed a lot of it. Then there's Beyond the Door 3, which was originally called A Mock Train, or no, it wasn't even called a Mock Train originally. It was Beyond the Door 3 when I got a script for it, and I was thrilled. I was like, oh, I want to do a show with this guy because his films are so odd. And and that was like the first of two times I almost got to work with that guy, and it was just like, and you're kind of like, you know, maybe there's another one coming up. I hear he's actually doing another Beyond the Door.
Really?
So maybe I can get on that one. But it's sort of like like
Fingers crossed.
everyone. You always try to get a second chance in this, like that lady, who finally finished Grizzly 2, because sort of you're trying to get a second chance after the first chance doesn't work out.
Yeah.
And the industry is strangely enough filled with a lot of that. It's really weird. I mean, people do things in this industry, and somehow they end up actually. It's like they fail up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. No. So one more question, and one thing about Grizzly 2, the one thing that's great about it, John Rhys Davis, he
Sure.
plays like this bear hunter in the movie named Bouchard, and he talks in third person the whole movie, which is pretty cool. But no, one question I always like to ask people, because when you have your journey in Hollywood, you never know when, it could be your last job or if it's something that you're really going to do forever. But over the years, did you ever keep any mementos for set or things that you worked on? Did you bring
Sure.
them back?
Well, I mean, I have a few things. I mean, I used to have more stuff, and like when I was like, I had the shops, open various shops. I had my display pieces, like my puppets from Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys, and
Nice.
things like that on display. And over the years, either you kind of get rid of them over the time people want to collect them, and you kind of pass them off
Yeah.
to collectors. And I've got a few things. I mean, I still have a couple of things here and there. Some of them, like I have a silicone leech from the movie Leeches that Dave Dakota made.
Nice.
I have one of the heads from Bill Malone's movie Parasomnia. I have a copy of that mummy I made for Dave Dakota's Ancient Evil: Scream of the Mummy.
Nice.
I love those titles. Yeah, but there's I mean a few things, but over the years I've sort of whittled down to, because
Yeah, you can't have them forever.
Yeah, you can't keep them forever, and some people do want these things. Some people do consider them to be valuable. I'll be honest with you, I've only got one like actual real prop that I really like cherish. I mean, it's the one thing that I never thought I'd ever have, and it's the one thing that I just like covet, like almost. It's the little miniature book from Equinox that Dave Allen made and used in all the stop motion scenes, and it's the only
Wow.
surviving book from the film. Or out of the 3 books that were made for the film, it's the only one that exists now.
I gotta
And
watch
it's
that.
so yeah, it's like we I don't have like the displays that like K&B has, and Vincent Guastini and guys like that. Those guys have like shops full of stuff. But I'll tell you one thing, they get dusty and you got to clean them.
Yeah,
off.
no, I love the idea of you passing it along because you're fueling someone's film passion. Like I interviewed Rico Ross recently, who was in Aliens. He played Private Frost.
I remember,
Dude, he kept one thing from that movie. He said he had the script, but he lost it over the years. But he had the dog tags. Some girl that was in high school reached and said, "I'm a huge fan. I'm joining the Marines because of you," and he mailed it to her. And I'm like, dude, you changed that. That's a story somebody will never forget.
Someone's gonna find those dog tags and they're gonna go like Private Ross or whatever,
Ross, yeah.
Or Private Ross or whatever his name. It's like, didn't he get killed?
Yeah. Oh man, Jeff, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being patient. And I love it's so funny. Like, I've been doing this for like over 3 years now. And it's just cool talking to so many different people that connect and work with each other, because I think special effects and like behind the scenes, it's such like not like a, obviously there's different parts of Hollywood that are clicky, but there's so many different projects and things people can do within the business. Like,
Sure.
Tim Lawrence is one of the first special
Yeah.
effects guys I interviewed, and he did sculpting. He was doing the makeup on the Thriller video. So he's done like so many different things, and I think that's yeah.
Yeah, he had his shop just up the complex from John Beekler's shop, his Little Buddy Productions, and that was it was just right up at the end of the complex where John Beekler's place was, and I remember him up there, and just
Oh, really? That was the name
yeah,
of that was Tim's shop?
that was Tim's shop. It's called Little Buddy Productions.
That's cool. Eddie told me he gave him his first job ever. Like, he got him a job on, I forget what movie, but he had to turn him down because he took another job without like knowing or something like that. But
Sure, yeah.
that's the business. Thanks for sharing your stories with me, Jeff.
Thank you, Doug. I really appreciate it. It was really great talking to you, and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Jeff was such a cool dude. Really, I just love talking with people that love their craft so much. And just the fact when he was talking about during the pandemic, like, he was still able to work during that. And he had just so many different things in his background. We did the video chat. My video is a little laggy, so I didn't want to post it. You'll see it in a clip on social media of some things that Jeff talks about. But yeah, I don't know. I just love that era of movie making. Like, 80s, 90s are my bag for sure. Like, God, I could talk to Jeff forever, and he was a long interview. He loved to chat, and I love when people are open and want to tell me stories, because that's what I love. I love doing these interviews, and then I go inside, I tell my wife about the interviews, and then 2 months later, when the interview goes out, I get to re-listen to it, edit it, and so much fun. Thank you, Jeff. He has a lot of cool projects coming out, so I'll put his IMDb in the notes so you can go check that out and go back and see other cool things that he's worked on over the years. You'll be like, whoa, he worked on this? Because he probably worked on it. Demolition Man? Yeah, he worked on that. Thanks, Jeff. And your homework, not that hard. Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. I always want to say The Final Friday because of Jason Goes to Hell. I don't know why. We already covered that one. I don't want to cover that one again. But this one is kind of in the same ilk. I think it's almost right around the same years. So yeah. So you can find it. It's on Tubi, Pluto, one of those. It's free. It was free all of October. I watched it. And yeah, can't wait to talk to Jamie about it. So don't forget to review, rate, share our podcast. Follow us on all social media at Sequels Only. And don't forget to check out our website, sequelsonly.com. Good night.
Good night, guys.